may be ready to light the chalice and to hear from Deborah. I think Vicki has a reading for us this morning too. So I'll do that. Just acknowledging the sacred space we create with our time together. And we've lost Vicki. Oh, there she is.
Oh, yeah. I chose this reading before I learned that its author, Thich Nhat Hanh, had died. But now it seems particularly poignant that I use it today. And those of you who were in church on Sunday know that both Sherry and AJ quoted from his writings during the service. This is a passage from his book, Peace is Every Step, which some of you may know. I think it's appropriate to use it today because every moment we have is indeed precious. And bear with me, you may think it doesn't have anything to do with what Deborah's going to say today, but stick with it. It's called Washing Dishes. To my mind, the idea that doing dishes is unpleasant can occur only when you aren't doing them. Once you're standing in front of the sink with your sleeves rolled up and your hands in the warm water, it's really quite pleasant. I enjoy taking my time with each dish, being fully aware of the dish, the water, and each movement of my hands. I know that if I hurry, the time of washing dishes will be unpleasant, and that would be a pity. For each minute, each second of life is a miracle. The dishes themselves and the fact that I am here washing them are miracles. Each thought, each action in the sunlight of awareness becomes sacred. In this light, no boundary exists between the sacred and the profane. I must confess it takes me a bit longer to do the dishes, but I live fully in each moment and I'm happy. Washing the dishes is, at the same time, a means and an end. That is, not only do we do the dishes in order to have clean dishes, we also do the dishes just to do the dishes, to live fully in each moment.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Vicki. I think when we do the dishes the next time, we'll all have a different point of view. And as you already know, Deb White is here this morning to talk with us about the experiences that she's had at Comfort Care Hospice in Webster. Deb?
Yeah, and I'm just before we begin, if people mute themselves, that would be great. And Mary, did you want to spotlight me?
I think that we've got you, if everyone has you as speaker view, that it will work.
Perfect. All right. So I love that Vicki chose that reading because as I was working on what I wanted to say, the biggest lesson I've learned from working in hospice is to stay present, which is, I think, exactly what the reading was about. So that was lovely. So a little bit about how I ended up volunteering over the last 8 years. When I was working, there was a teacher that I was very fond of, and she ended up with brain cancer, and she ended up at Advent House in Fairport. And I had never been in a hospice, certainly not a two-bed hospice like many of those that are around the Rochester area. And I was astounded because it was indeed a home and a kitchen and a living room and bedrooms and all of that. And it was the most loving environment. You could visit my friend anytime you wanted. And towards the end, when she couldn't talk anymore, you could crawl into bed and you could just hold her. Um, and it was wonderful. Um, the volunteers who were there were so loving, and you realize, of course, people pass through over and over and over again in comfort cares, and yet they treat each one as special as they are. A number of them came to her funeral. It was, and I thought, that's the most loving way I can imagine to die. So I retired then, and on my way every morning to the gym, I would pass Webster Comfort Care right around the corner, and they had this big volunteer sign out front. Wouldn't you like to volunteer? And I thought, I think I would like to volunteer to honor my friend Carol, who died at Advent House. So I got trained, and you learn what comfort cares are all about. They are two-bed homes, staffed primarily by volunteers and a few paid staff. And they allow people at the end of their life, within the last 3 months of their life, to live in the comfort of a home at no cost to themselves or their families. There are about 17 of them in the greater Rochester area. And we don't do intense medical treatment. We are there, it says, neither to hasten nor to prevent death. We are there to just journey along with them. And so I worked a number of different shifts when I first started. I worked with a huge variety of people. Some of my favorite were the 85-year-old women who were there and by my side and caring for the residents. When you volunteer, you certainly do resident care, you do cooking, you do cleaning, you do changing bedding, doing laundry, whatever is needed to do to make the house run. I worked with other retirees. I worked with folks who had full-time jobs and wanted to just volunteer on the weekends. Some of them were stay-at-home mothers. Sometimes there were high school students who wanted to go into some form of medicine. College students on break were often coming in over Christmas and joining us. And sometimes I clicked with people and I'm like, what a blessing it has been to work with you today. That was more often than not. Sometimes there was some tension between them and a little bit of like, would they prefer to work solo or not? But anyway, you expose you to a wide variety of people. I worked one day with a gentleman who didn't seem to respond to my comments or questions at all. And I thought, well, you're kind of aloof for a volunteer. What I didn't understand was he was very hard of hearing and he had no idea I was talking to him. So I said, oh, here, Deborah, is lesson number 1. Don't jump to conclusions. Stay flexible and in the moment and don't take things personally. Because I'm thinking, how does he not like me? I mean, I'm here to work comfort care with him. How can this be? And that led to broadening that learning. I worked with several women of whom I was very fond, and we worked a number of times. One woman overlapped with us, so we always had this joyful little get together as we changed our shifts, and I was so fond of them. And much later, they were wonderful, dedicated people, and I found out later that they were very, very different politically than me. I mean, off the scale, politically different. And I thought, I'm astounded and grateful I didn't know that before we worked together, because I realized I would have been judgmental and perhaps jumped to conclusions. Like, remember my first lesson? I forgot it. Because these people are amazing, and just because they are staunch Republicans, very conservative, and Trump supporters did not make them any less of an amazing person and a dedicated volunteer. I learned that sometimes the family needs you more than the resident. We had a woman who was dying very young, and her employer held her retirement party at the comfort care home. And she was so sick with bone cancer and easily broken bones that there was really very little care we could offer her because she was in such pain every time we moved her. So the house staff asked the husband if he would spend the night in the family room to be there to comfort her if he needed it. And in the morning I asked him, I said, is there anything I can do for you? Thinking I could make him coffee or something. And he said, yes, I would like to help you sort out the greeting cards that my wife made. She was a fabulous pen and ink drawer, and she made tons of these greeting cards. And what he wanted to do was to put little packets of the 5 greeting cards together and tie them on a ribbon and have them available at her funeral. So I spent the morning with him, sorting cards and packing them up and tying them together with ribbon. And I realized you have to stay attuned to where the need is greatest. And I couldn't support his wife, but I could support him. Another lesson, there was a resident I adored. I adore a lot of them. And we had a lovely time being together and talking. And when they're there for a couple of months, you really get to know them and their story. And so I woke early one morning. I generally work the 7 to 11 a.m. shifts. And I thought, oh, I get to see Sarah today. And I came in and I learned she had died that night. And I thought, oh, Deborah, you came in with an expectation. And in hospice, you can't have a lot of expectations. You just have to be present to what's going on. And I will say now, I will not use people's real names in deference to privacy, except for one person at the end, and I will explain why. I have had the astounding privilege to overlap with our night aide, Loretta, real name. She is one of 12 children. She got married when she was 16, and her husband had to sign her report cards so that she could get through high school. She is one of the most amazing women I have ever met. Unconditional love, unconditional energy, and she is now 77. And she comes, oh, I love the night shift. No, because then I get to go home and do the things I love. I have learned more about unconditional love from working beside and interacting with Loretta. It has been wonderful. She is one of the most positive people. She loves her work. And she can change the bed on a patient a resident who cannot get out of bed by herself. Completely changed. I'm like, how do you do that, Loretta? She's amazing. And so my lesson there is Jen Crow echoed something that I'm sure we've heard before. And she said, everybody you meet teaches you something. Some people about how you want to behave, and some people how you don't want to behave. And I thought, Loretta teaches me how I want to behave. May I be this gracious when I am 77. People approach the end of their life in so many different ways. Some are so eager to die. We have a resident who said, well, God didn't do his work last night. I said, I'm sorry. And she said, he didn't take me. I'm ready to go. And then one morning I was working with a young man who was a resident, actually, a medical resident. And we needed to wake her up for some important medication, and we were having awfully hard time. So he took Lorraine by the shoulders and he said, wake up. And she goes, oh, she says, I thought you were God. She said, I saw your face and I thought I saw God and I thought I'd gone to heaven, but it's just you. And I thought, okay, you just need to be open to the humor that arises. And we were able to laugh about that because she was quite disappointed, but it was just that wonderful moment of, oh. I have learned that you need to trust people that they know what they want. And I have, as a longtime educator and mother, I often think I run the risk of thinking that I know what's best for people. Yes, it is a curse of the educator, I'm sure. And so I will sometimes rub someone's legs or feet because I think, oh, that would offer me such comfort. And then I remember to ask, does that feel good? And some of them say, oh, yes, keep doing it. And a number of them say, no. And so I've learned and keep reminding myself that I ask before I do something that I think will offer comfort, but it does not. One day, a woman came into the volunteer office, which doesn't happen very often. They mostly spend their time in their rooms or out in the rest of the home, the living room and dining room and kitchen. And she came into my room and she said, my name is Carol. Well, I worked with her for weeks and weeks and weeks. And I said, I'm sorry, what did I call you? And she said, you called me sweetheart. And I thought, oh, and I said, I am so sorry, Carol, I won't. And I realized that I think I return to sometimes the same way you did with the little kids in the class. You'd say, sweetheart, come here. And so I need to be very cognizant of what people want. They know what they want. We had a couple scary moments. One morning, somebody went missing. And I'm like, this is a 2-bed house. I was in the garage, out on the grounds, in the kitchen, I looked everywhere. Where could this resident be? And he was not particularly mobile. And I finally thought, I opened it. We have sliding glass doors that lead out to a deck. He wasn't on the deck. And I opened the door and I peered around. And there he was, hunkered way over in the corner, smoking a cigarette. Well, of course, you're not allowed to smoke a cigarette. But we found him, and I was so grateful because I thought I'm going to lose my volunteer status if we lose a resident and I can't find out where they went. Another afternoon, I think it must have been a snowy afternoon because I was there alone with one resident that I knew well. And for some reason, the house alarm went off and I could not get it to stop. I tried everything and I called the director and she wasn't there. And I called the 1-800 number and they said, yeah, we'll be there tomorrow. It was one of those kind of things. And it was that loud, annoying, and I turned to Pat and I said, Pat, I am so sorry. And she says to me, you know what? I'm not worried. You ran a school. I figure you know what you're doing. And so I thought, okay, she trusts me. And eventually someone came and they turned the alarm off and we were good. We had an amazing gentleman. He was one of 6. He was dying of cancer, and 4 of his siblings had already died of cancer. And the other living sibling was estranged from the whole family. And the amazing and sad part is that the mother was still alive. So she was about to lose her 5th child. Initially, he was incredibly standoffish, did not want interaction, very unhappy, very comfortable expressing how uncomfortable and unhappy he was. And he had stepped into the role of fatherhood for a number of his nieces and nephews as his siblings had died. And so there were all kinds of fractures and hurt in this family from so much death. And he decided at some point that he wanted to host Thanksgiving dinner at the Comfort Care home, which we welcome. Families are welcome. And they had a blowout Thanksgiving meal. And they filled the dining room and the living room with tables and chairs, and the whole family came. And he said later on that he thought it was the most healing thing he could have done for his family. And he felt like it had shifted the dynamics in the family and that it really had made a difference. And then one morning he called me in, and this is the man who didn't want to have anything to do with us. He said, do you think when the director comes in, you could tell her to come in and see me? Because I want to do something to honor this house and how kind they've been to me and my family. So I've learned from that people evolve and change or don't change at their own pace. And it's not my responsibility to influence that or hasten it. I just need to be present for it. A bunch of random thoughts. I'm astounded at how many people fairly easily seem to transition to living in comfort care. They're many of them giving up their homes. They're coming directly from their homes and their comfort there. And they just sort of step in and welcome us. And it's a huge amount of volunteers. So there are 2 of us every shift. So over the course of just a shift of weeks, you could meet 56 people, 56 volunteers, plus the nurses, plus the visiting nurses, plus the director. On and on it goes. And many of them take it in stride. A lot of them keep their very familiar routines. A lot of what comforts people are pictures. That's probably the thing I see most that people bring. Occasionally, we've had people bring their own rugs and furniture to make it really comfortable, bring their own chairs. And because it's a comfort care and we're not a hospital, there are many things that we can do that that other situations can't. People bring, excuse me, my insulin pump is talking to me, so I'm just going to talk right back to it here. So they bring their favorite things to wear, and sometimes they'll say, I want the teal sweater with the little logo on the corner. And you're looking through, and there's certain socks they like. Some come and stay in their robes the whole time. Some want to get dressed. We've had a woman come with her makeup mirror and put on full makeup every morning. It's just, the variety is wonderful. We had a woman who came straight from a hospital, and they had determined that she wouldn't recover. And she was single, and the only thing that she had in her life that was important to her was her cat. And she had not seen her cat in a month. The neighbors had been caring for the cat. So the first day she was there, the neighbors brought the cat. And I happened to come in on that shift, and I come in, and there's the cat lying on the bed with the woman. And I thought, where else could you do this? And we've had people have their dogs brought in. One recently had his pet ferret brought in. We can do wonderful things that help people. One of the things that I've also learned is that giving showers is incredibly calming and comforting, and creates a bond between you and the person you're helping shower. And if you get sometimes there's this real little balance about what's just the right temperature, and you get the right temperature and say, oh, do a little bit on my back. And the joy that comes from that is, because so often people are in discomfort, that I think a way that you can bring them a little joy and comfort is to put warm water on them. And I love that part. I've learned, have shower caps where you heat them up in a microwave, and you put it on like a old woman shower cap, and it has shampoo in there, and it goes like this, and they come out clean. And sometimes that's just what they need to help them feel better. I have connected with many others from other circles of my life working at Comfort Care, and including former colleagues that I worked with in several of the districts where I was. I've had a number of parents of colleagues, people I would work with, and their parent, something else would show up. I had the parent of a very dear friend die there. My neighbor across the street died there at the end. The sister-in-law of my piano tuner. I mean, they're just endless connections of people, and I love it. Talk about the the interconnected web of life. Here we are in this little home, and there's all of that. There are sometimes people are so ill at the end of their life and in so much pain. There's very little you can do to comfort them, and certainly we try everything, but sometimes you just can't seem to help them get past the pain. And just this week, I was sitting with someone, and she just could not get comfortable. She could articulate how comfortable she was, but there was nothing we could do. So finally, I thought, I'm just going to sit and hold her hand. And then I thought, oh, Parker Palmer and Soul Matters, non-anxious presence. That's what you need to be, Deborah. And I'm holding this woman's hand, and I thought, oh, I'm present, but I'm as anxious as heck. I could feel the tension in my back. It's like non-anxious presence. So there are just endless reminders that you need to be present in the moment. And now I'm going to go on to two of my favorite parts of Comfort Care, not despite, wrong word entirely, in addition to the richness of the people and the experiences and all that I work with. 5 years ago, I was paired with a gentleman named Greg, who is a retired chemical engineer from Kodak, as is his wife. And they both volunteer, but they volunteer different shifts at Comfort Care. And so Greg and I have been together for 5 years, on the 7 to 11 a.m. shift on Tuesday mornings. And Greg has turned out to be one of the finest friends I've ever had. Because of the situation you're in, you learn to talk openly about everything because people are there and all of it. We are very similar in our interests, and I do some work for Strong, and he said, well, he and his wife might like to do similar work, and so now our lives overlap there. So I often see Greg, his wife Jenny, and I see Greg every Tuesday. I often see them other times during the week. Greg and I both love to do the spelling bee on the New York Times. He can get to Genius and Queen Bee in a heartbeat, and I'm struggling along with Welcome to Spelling Bee, but we have a lot of fun doing that. We recommend books to each other, and he and his wife have two daughters who are now in their 30s, and he loves little kids. And so when I babysit my 2-year-old granddaughter, he started to say, can I come over and visit? And so often on Tuesday mornings when we finish our shift, Greg will come over and play. And my granddaughter Kennedy now calls him my friend Greg. She'll say, my friend Greg coming? And my son-in-law said to my daughter, the parents, he said, honey, how does it feel that our daughter's best friend is a 65-year-old man? I don't know about that, but it is absolutely joyful to work with Greg. And I said to him one day, I have a very hard time describing our relationship to others. And he said, I'm like your brother. And I thought, you are. I've never had a brother, but if I had one, I would want you. And so I have a brother who I am extremely fond of, and he feels a part of my family. I feel a part of his family. And so I am incredibly grateful. And I said to him, what's the chance that an educator, from West Side or East Side, wherever I live, and a chemical engineer from Cote would overlap? And yet here we have this amazing friendship. So I am so grateful for that. And the last person I want to talk about is Pat Menz. And I'm using her real name because she's been in all kinds of publications for her time at Comfort Care. And I don't even know where to begin. Pat came to us dying of anal cancer, which is incredibly unpleasant. And to the day she died, her attitude was as positive and upbeat as it could be. I have never met someone as gracious and loving and positive as she is. And she surprisingly, even though people are only supposed to be with us the last 3 months of her life, she was there 13 months. And we'd always have worry at the 3 and 6 month interval, but she was declining and declining. She was the mother of 12, and a lot of them live locally. And so I got to know not only Pat, but her family. And the love and the connection that this woman created was amazing. A couple of her sons, she had 3 daughters and 9 sons. A couple of her sons every single day on their way home from work would call Pat and Pat on the phone. She was just the glue that held this family together. She was very limited in her sight, and so she couldn't always see us well. But one of the goals was to get to know each volunteer. And she learned each of our lives in ways that were amazing. And so she'd get to know you, and then she'd say, well, Ruth, how did that new paint color turn out on the dining room that you're going to paint last week? And Mary, did that plant survive? You were talking about trying to feed it. Amazing that she would remember everything about you, and she'd get to know your kids and your family. And one day I rode my bicycle, it's so close, and she said, now, you didn't ride unsafely, did you? And you're going to ride home with your helmet, right? She was so worried about us. And one day there was a really bad snowstorm and Pat was the only one there. She told the volunteers, you can go home. I'll be fine here alone. We said, no, One time she called a volunteer up to make sure they'd gotten home safely because it was, a tough day of travel. Pat love knew no ends. She was amazing, and she'd listen to books on tape. She always wore a pink nightie and a pink robe. Those were her go-to things. And I learned stories about her family and her grandkids, and all of it was just amazing. And I talked a lot about her to many people. I introduced her to friends and family members when I could. And I was talking to her one day about talking with my sister, and she said, "Well, is that the sister in Atlanta that I met last summer?" Yes, Pat, it is. Her memory was amazing. And remember, there were 56 of us a week, and she had to get to know each of us. So my spiritual director, Joy Collins, said to me one day, "Deborah, why don't you interview Pat and find out who she is and what makes her tick? I mean, you know a lot about her interactions, but find out her philosophy." So one day, she was the only resident there, and I was the only volunteer. And I asked her if I could interview her, and she said yes. So I will tell you some of these gems because she gave me some of the best lessons ever. She said, and these are sort of random, she said, "You're not taking anything with you, and you think it's all important." And I thought, that's so true. She said, and I don't know if these are her words or mine, but she said exquisite listening. And if she defined herself that way, it couldn't have been better. If I defined her that way, that was what it was. And pervasive gratitude. She was grateful for every single moment. Undivided attention and devoted loving. That was our Pat. She said, "I'm still evolving. I'm not narrow or judgmental. I'm very blessed that my mind is very open. I'm not here to change people. I'm here to take them as they are." This woman's 93, still evolving. She says, "Need to ask for what you want. Failures help you hold on to the good moments." And she cared so much about it. And she said, "I am here to make every single volunteer know they're an angel." And she said, "You know you're doing God's work. There's no better work that you can do." She said, "Never love something that can't love you back." She talked a lot about growing up. She said her dad was a mail carrier, and he'd come home on Christmas Eve with gifts that the people on his route had given him, cookies and cakes. She said, "We didn't have much, but we did have just a little, and that made us grateful." And her husband, who had died a number of years before, so I never got to meet, I loved her description of him. She said, "Bob, my husband, his philosophy was use what you have along the way." She said, "He was a prince of a man, a wise, gentle man, and he never put me down. He respected me." And I just thought, so Pat grew up loving, she married a loving man, and they had 12 loving children. She saw many, many residents come and go because she was there the 13 months. She always made a point to go over to get to meet the person and their family, to wish them a happy birthday, to get to know the other family. And sadly, while Pat was there, we had a young mother come in, and the mother had 3 children. 2 were teens, and 1 was in elementary school. And it was one of the hardest deaths to witness this. And the family lived very close by, so the children came back and forth all the time. And they started to treat Pat as a grandmother, and she started to treat the children as her grandchildren. And it was beautiful. And the young man was turning 12, and so Pat arranged to have a birthday party at the house for her fellow resident's son who was turning 12. And she would say to me, God put me here for Jessica's family. And there was such such a connection. So at Pat's funeral and then the reception afterwards, her youngest son, whom I didn't know well, I knew all the ones who lived locally, her youngest son got up and said, "Although I'm the youngest of 12, my mother made me feel like each of us was an only child." And I thought that was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. And I thought Pat made each of us feel like we were the most important volunteer. My God, the woman knew how to love. So when she died, I have to tell you about when she died. She had been steady but declining for a long time. And then a couple days before it was Greg and my shift, she really was doing a pretty steep decline. And she said, talked to one of her kids that morning. She says, "I don't know if this is the dress rehearsal or the real thing, but I'm not going to be here around real long." And she said to her daughter, Kathy, who I'm still very connected to, she said to Kathy, "Go get the Chardonnay and the wine glasses." Well, Pat loved a little glass of wine every night, but when she came to Comfort Care, she gave it up. And Comfort said, "You can have a little glass of wine every night." She said, "No, I wouldn't do that." So she had Pat get the wine glasses and the wine, and she asked us to toast her when she was gone. And Pat died on our shift. And Greg and I to this day feel so blessed that Pat died while we were there and we could be there with the family and support them and be with Pat. So it was very hard for me after she died. I felt like I'd lost one of the most loving souls I'd ever known. And I couldn't find a way to process it very well. And then I decided to do some art because that's often how I express myself. So this is what I did to show Pat. Can you see it okay? So Pat, honestly, is the wine cork remover because she loved her wine and she didn't get to get it while she was there. And I took a pink bathrobe and cut it so she has this large, voluminous robe at the bottom because she reminds me of the Punchinells in not Swan Lake, what's it called? The Christmas one, where the mother comes out and all the little dancers are coming out underneath her skirts.
Nutcracker.
Thank you, thank you, Howie, the Nutcracker. And I thought, here, all of us are under this umbrella of Pat's love. Unbelievable. And yet this one, each of us feels like we are the only one. We are the most important. And so I kept that art I showed it to the family and to Kathy, and I kept it for about 3 years. And I'd asked Kathy and she said she'd like it. So this past summer, I was finally able to let it go and give it to Kathy and her family. So that is random, wonderful thoughts about the blessing of working at a hospice.
Oh, Deborah, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your lessons and your addiction to spelling bee, which we know some of us also share. And we'll open it now for comments and questions. If someone would like to speak, if you would please not only unmute yourself, but raise your hand. That way we'll be able to stay organized, I hope. As I said, I'm on this new computer, so I'm crossing my fingers here.
Ruth is up. I'll start with her. I can see her.
Yeah.
Deborah, thank you. As Deborah knows, my mother died in Webster Comfort Care home, and I always wondered. I mean, it was a completely incredible time in our lives. we have been unbelievably grateful for everything that she received there. As you said, anything that anyone wanted, they got. They took care of our family the way they took care of her. One time I got kicked out, actually. My mother had called in a nurse who was out for dinner in the middle of the night because she wanted to use the bathroom. She didn't want to use, my mother was a very directive person. And I was very annoyed at her the next day. And I told her that she should not have done that, and she should not have annoyed, brought in the staff. She could have used the bedpan one time. And she was annoyed at me because and the nurse called me into the office, and I thought she was going to tell me, that they were annoyed at my mother. And she said, I think it's probably time for you to go get a massage. She said, she said, and maybe don't come back for a couple of days. She said, we can deal with your mother. And she was within her rights to call us. And so you probably need a break. And so that's just, and I always wondered, honestly, how the volunteers did it. And now I understand. And I thank you so much. And everyone who worked there. My mother died 11 years ago at 102. She had her 102nd birthday at the house. The volunteers gave her a birthday party, and she died about 2 days later. It was just an unbelievable experience. So thank you for what you do. And until people have experienced it, it's really hard to believe that, and it's all free. They don't charge a nickel, which is so remarkable. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Laura, would you like to go next?
Sorry, trying to unmute. Thank you so much, Deborah. That was just great. I can relate very much to most of your stories because that was my industry as well, and spent a good deal of time in direct care. Most of it was in the Medicare end of stuff. But one thing I wanted to point out, Rochester is extremely unique because I think you said, Deborah, there are 17 of these comfort care homes in the area. Most towns and cities, this is technically a residence. It is not a hospice. And the many cities have residential facilities, but they charge the families. And the fact that these are supported by volunteers and raise money to cover their utilities and whatnot is extremely unique. Now, many hospice programs have their own inpatient facilities, but they're not 2-bedroom facilities. They're teaming with staff and with volunteers. So I think that we need to consider ourselves here in Monroe County lucky because this is rare. Frankly, I had not seen this anywhere until I moved here and thought, how can that be a hospice? I'd see these little houses, and then I realized it's not a hospice, it's a residence for terminally ill patients and families. And you are the perfect example of a volunteer, Deborah. Thank you so much for presenting. It was great.
Thank you, Laura.
I had a similar story, your story about the person who was tucked in the corner smoking. The issue I ran into once was the woman would not stay home from bingo. And the physician did an at-home visit, and she was away at bingo. And he said, she's supposed to be bedbound. And I thought, well, you don't know bingo then. And in the valley where I lived, all the little towns, the Catholic churches had their own bingo games. And she knew if it was Wednesday, we're going to San Luis. And if it's Tuesday, we're going to Monte Vista. And so we had to schedule the doctor accordingly. Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you, Laura.
Oh, Howie and then Ellie.
Deb, that was very moving. You've had 8 years now to think about what context do I want for myself when I reach a certain stage in life. Could you share your thinking on what would be ideal for you, or what your rank order would be of how you would like to spend your last and where you would like to spend your last months?
Yeah, thank you, Howie. It's a great question. What's gotten very clear to me is that I do not want to suffer just for the sake of saying that I can live. I've told my daughters over and over again that what I would really like to do is the Native American and just have them go and leave me out by a tree when the time comes. And they said, they got let me inside. I said, Ma, we can just picture taking your wheelchair and going to the edge of the forest and dumping you out and driving away, and then the cops are going to be after us. So I don't need to prolong it by any means. I have a very good life. I'm happy I've lived my life. I don't wish anything to end soon, but if I was in a comfort care, I would hope it to be a very short stay. I mean, I think a comfort home is wonderful. I think it's many times easier on the family because then they don't have the memories of the person dying right there. And sometimes that's what people want, what they don't want. But I don't want to burden anybody. And when I know that at comfort care, people are volunteering, they want to be there by choice, that makes it easier. But I love this question for all of us. I think it's something worth discussing. Thanks, Howie.
Mm-hmm.
Ellie.
Thank you. I just needed to unmute. I guess my question was really along the same lines as Howie's. I'm wondering if you had a sense of how you felt about death, your own death, and as from your experience there, if it's changed. Were you afraid of death? Were you stoic about it, and if your experience through hospice necessarily had an impact on that?
Another great question, Ellie. I think I always thought I don't want it, and I don't want it anytime soon. I don't want it. And now I think, not that I was fearful, I just didn't want to think about it even. And I think I've lost any fear or worry that I might have. As I say, I don't want to suffer, but other than that, and I believe for like Pat, her goodness was so pervasive that it lives on in me, and hopefully I help it live on in other people. So I think when there's that much richness and beauty and depth in people's interactions when they're alive, that they can still carry on, like her soul can still carry on with us, and that's beautiful to me.
So my follow-up, maybe this is more like a philosophy on death question, but
yeah, I don't know that I have a well-articulated one.
Yeah. Okay. So you don't, either.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Ellie.
Oh, I'm sorry. I always have trouble with my mic. It's either the end or it's a part of a journey. I wondered if you had any sense of that for yourself.
I'm sorry, Ellie, I still can't hear you.
Okay, never mind. It's okay.
All right, maybe later.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Are there other comments or questions for Deborah? Anne and Tom?
So Tom's mom was in a hospice care, but in a hospital setting for the last couple days of her life. And we didn't get there in time, but they kept her there so we could see her, which may have had more meaning for Tom than for me. But I found the people I was interacting with to be what I would call smarmy. They were like too, I don't know. How do you judge how to interact with family when you run into somebody like me?
Um, I think a lot of it is just listening and looking and trying to read people. Um, the other day, there was a woman I didn't even know very well, but her sister was dying, and she, very, very tough end of life. And so I just went in and I put my arm around her, and she just grabbed on and held. And so I thought she needs that support. I didn't need to say a thing except for to just hold her. So I think it's sort of those lessons is to be as present as you can and take your cues early. And if people are like, I'm okay, you trust that they're okay and they don't want you in the room. And so sometimes I will say to the family, do you need help? Sometimes they want it. Sometimes they say, nope, I feel better if I'm out doing the dishes myself or getting coffee. So I think a lot of it is just asking a lot of questions and staying open to what their responses are and not take it personally if they want to do it themselves or don't want your support.
Deb, you point out how individually we have such different wants and needs at such a sacred time of someone's death. And you're a wonderful role model for me in thinking about how to do that at any point, not only at someone's death. Paul, I think you're going to be the last of us to comment because we're close to 11. Go ahead.
This has been a fabulous explanation of how this all works. The question I have is how you've handled this through COVID. That a month ago, just over a month ago, my brother went into palliative care at Strong Memorial Hospital. This all came rather rapidly, but we were allowed to have up to 3 visitors in his room at all times, except overnight when they only allowed 2. And the entire time that I was there, 24 to 36 hours, I kept thinking of how fortunate that I, Jim's daughter, and finally his son from Colorado could be with him at this time. And I think of all the people during COVID who have not been able to be with their loved ones at the last time. It just blew my mind away how fortunate we were. How did you handle it there at the hospice?
We closed along with all the other hospices in the region for maybe it was a year. I can't quite tell. And then we started up. We have very different protocols. We are masked 100% of the time. Even with your volunteer, everybody's vaccinated. You're wearing gloves all the time. Initially, they would only let 2 people in the whole time. I think that has softened a little bit as things have gotten better. We still don't have family members spend the night, so we're constantly wiping down every surface. So, but you're absolutely right. The beauty of this kind of hospice is that you can go anytime. I mean, we're open 24 hours, and so if you need to go in the middle of the night, you go in the middle of the night to be with someone. So it was much easier before COVID, but our new reality.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, I'm guessing that there's much more conversation to be had amongst us at home or around a meal, but we all want to join in thanking you, Deborah, for telling us about your experiences. It's very moving, inspiring, and gives us a lot to think about ourselves. So with that, I will extinguish our chalice, and we'll look forward to seeing everyone again next Saturday.